No, you do. So, James,
Yeah, mate.
while we've been analysing the Australian federal election, the slaughter in Gaza has continued, and the resistance by the Yemenis, by the Houthis, has continued.
Yes. Yeah, you're right, Jordie. You're right. We've been pretty preoccupied recently, and I don't think we've given enough daylight to continuing to report and discuss what's happening in the Middle East. There is still a lot going on, so I think the kind of situation in Gaza has stagnated for the most part. So there's not these huge, massive headlines come out. When I say stagnated, I mean like stagnated in the way that there's still daily airstrikes killing dozens of people. There's still, for example, Palestinian resistance factions, Hamas included, dealing like pretty severe casualties to occupation forces. We are still seeing, I think we're in the second or third month of the worst level of blockade by the Israeli forces.
They've now blocked all humanitarian aid coming into the Strip.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrific. There has been, like, it's essentially famine conditions, dude. What little food is left has gone up, 1,600% in value. We're seeing children starving to death. I've seen horrible, horrible pictures, which unfortunately we're all way too used to, of like children starving, of families starving. I saw a video of a doctor talking about how many women are coming in lacking basic sanitary female supplies, like menstrual products, for example. And then so to substitute, they're using just bits of cloth and stuff like that, which then, again, there's no clean water in Gaza, really. So all the water is, contaminated with fecal matter, and they're getting all these horrible infections.
They're living in apocalyptic conditions.
No one could live in that condition. No human being. Every human being, even if you're the people perpetrating these horrors, no one has the right to live in these conditions. So that's going on. The Israelis have announced that this was quite recently. They pushed through the Knesset how can I say it? A motion by the Israeli Security Council to officially occupy the Gaza Strip.
So the occupation prior to this wasn't official.
It wasn't it was de facto occupation. Correct. It wasn't actual official occupation, or what's left of the Gaza Strip.
But now the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, has put through a motion to officially, as their policy, annex and occupy.
Annex, yes, correct. And they also they're doing this under the pretext of fighting Hamas, and they will relocate the Palestinians for their own safety. So obviously the Israelis care so much about the native population in Gaza. They don't want them to get hurt. Hence why they're starving them. Hence why they are being bombed every day. You have to do some mental gymnastics to figure that out. They have said that plans to
when you say relocate, is this a permanent relocation to another area? Is this them bringing luxury apartments inside Israel, or
no? This is like mass ethnic cleansing on the scale of the Armenians in 1915, for example. It's estimated. No one can really be sure how many Palestinians are left in Gaza. So I think pre-October 7th, it was a bit over 2 million. I think the death toll could be as high as 500,000.
Who knows?
No one knows. No one really knows. The direct death toll is about 52,000 or something, or 58, I believe. But no one knows for sure.
So no one's counting.
We went over the Lancet article last year and said that typically you're going to have between 3 and 15 indirect deaths for every kind of direct death. And that's in situations that are far more favourable than what the Palestinians are dealing
right now.
Right now.
As hunger starts to stalk the Strip.
Yeah, and so they said that, look, we've announced plans to maybe provide a bit of basic aid and food and necessities in to facilitate 1.2 million people. That's 60% of the supposed population of Gaza. So whether, again, in just their infinite cruelty, that's all they're going to let in. Or maybe they actually know, hey, there's only 1.2 million of them left. We're going to make sure they're well fed. Either way, it's absolutely sickening. And their belligerence is such that when I say belligerence, I mean belligerence for international law and that basic human decency,
And dignity.
Human dignity. There was a boat carrying aid. I believe it was called the Freedom Flotilla, something like that. I don't quote me on that exactly. This is about a week and a half ago, and they were traveling through the Mediterranean, and it was like a joint operation by like volunteers and aid organisations from like all over the world, like Turkey, Australia, Spain, etc. Carrying aid and food with the intention to literally just boat your way across the Mediterranean to Gaza. And distribute just no more organisations involved, just get them food, essentially. This was deliberately targeted and hit by an Israeli drone, which disabled the boat. And then I think it took over 12 hours of this boat disabled, leaking in the middle of the Mediterranean off the coast of Malta before they actually had any attempt to conduct a rescue operation on these people. Funnily enough, Greta Thunberg, everyone's favourite autistic teenager,
activist,
was meant to be on board the boat, but I'm not sure for what other extraneous reason she wasn't at the end of the day. Quick funny thing to note before we move on, I did love how when Greta Thunberg was talking about saving the environment and like criticising Donald Trump and all that, and you're stealing my future, etc., etc. She was just everywhere, much to the love of the kind of liberal European elites and much to the hatred of the reactionary world. Now, ever since she came out and started championing the Palestinian cause, you do not hear a peep out of anyone about Greta Thunberg. But, she's standing up for what she believes in regardless, and good on her.
Just as a footnote, James, back in 2014 in one of the massacres that the Israelis perpetrated against Palestine, they also targeted several humanitarian aid ships, I believe, in the Mediterranean.
I believe so. Yeah, they did. And they raided them and shot people and stuff like that. Yes, correct. And again, this is nothing new.
So this isn't, a random once-off. This has happened before.
No, exactly. And we've seen, man, we've seen the Australian citizens as part of the World Central Kitchen that were killed. We've seen
Zomi Frankham.
Yeah, we've seen all the United Nations workers, including in Lebanon, deliberately targeting and occupying UN, kind of UN stations and stuff.
The last time I saw the statistics, I think it was 300 UN workers.
Oh, it's something crazy, man. That's why I'm pretty sure the UN's backed off. We can't just keep feeding our staff and our resources into this meat grinder. And I think it is. The Israelis are very good. They know how to play the American media and the Western media.
Yeah.
So they know that obviously at the start of this, while this has been going on in the background, they know that the world will move on. The media cycle will move on. So we'll keep obviously caring about this, but it's not going to be making headlines in the same pro or against way. It's just not going. It's just not going to be present. And they know how to play the game. So they know that hey, look, we can just starve, 2 million people for X amount of months. If we did it right at the beginning, it wouldn't look as good. But if you do it now, everyone's apathetic. No one cares.
Wait till there's a new pope elected that happens to be North American, and then just keep turning up the intensity.
Yeah, turning up the intensity. Exactly. But I did want to talk. While this is happening, there are rumours of a bit of a shift in the diplomatic sphere. It is reported that the bromance might be done. The Trump-Bibi bromance might, in fact, be over. Yes, correct. So there's kind of been a slew of new articles and new reporting, and I'll get to some of the reasoning, I think, why afterwards. But everyone kind of obviously assumed that Trump would be everything the Zionist regime wanted. Obviously, he took $100 million from the Miriam Adelson, arch priest of Zionist influence, priestess of Zionist influence in the United States. In his last term, he officially recognized Jerusalem as the capital. He's kind of just given the go-ahead to attacking Gaza and further settlement of the West Bank. And he talked a very tough game about Iran and talked a very tough game against the Houthis. However, there's been a few things that have happened where, put together collectively, you can start to see how they may be differing from towing the Israeli line. And obviously Israel they both don't their interests are aligned. I'm not saying either one is controlling the other, but their interests are for the most part aligned. That's how I perceive the situation. So firstly, they were not exempt from tariffs.
Yep.
Which is interesting. I think everyone kind of assumed that they would be.
Yep.
And then secondly, the United States has announced that the US is no longer pursuing further escalation with Yemen.
Yeah.
So they've been bombing the crap out of Yemen. They've had, they moved...
For over a month now.
Yeah, long time. And they've caused massive amounts of damage. The Israelis have been joining in as well.
Yeah.
But they moved all their kind of B-2 bombers to Diego Garcia. And people were... In the Indian Ocean, people were speculating, look, they could be preparing to strike Iran or strike Yemen. It might be kind of like a pressure move, for a move to kind of put pressure on. However, their policy, in my opinion, has actually been largely ineffective because the Houthis are still managing to blockade Israeli ships. The US, the Houthis have shot down over 20, I think the number's closer to 24 US Reaper drones, and also taken out 2 US fighter jets.
Please elaborate on the fighter jets, because I heard about this.
Yes, so what's happened is there was a situation where they haven't directly shot them down, but there was a situation where Houthi missiles, Yemeni missiles, launched at a US aircraft carrier, caused the aircraft carrier to take an emergency evasive maneuver, which then resulted in the plane falling off the back of the craft.
Yeah.
Whether this is the Americans saying that, because that's kind of established. Whether that's actually what happened, whether they did actually shoot one down, I'm honestly not sure.
Or whether one of the fighter jets just simply fell off the aircraft carrier.
Fell off, yeah, possibly. But that's a big expense. The US hasn't lost material and equipment like this in a long time.
Yeah.
And it is funny because as well, so you'd have US pilots that were doing bombing runs over Yemen, and they came back and they announced that lots of these pilots were really traumatized, Jordie.
Yeah.
And the reason they were traumatized is because when doing their customary bombing of civilian infrastructure and cancer hospitals and all the good stuff, is they were finding that they were actually getting targeted and shot back at.
Yep.
And this caused such distress and trauma amongst these pilots because they were so unused to it.
Yeah.
They were so not used to this happening that they had to start implementing special kind of like post-traumatic stress relief and management programs amongst these kind of flight teams to help them deal with the trauma of getting potentially shot at while bombing people. And that just shows as well that how unprepared, in my opinion, obviously they still have the overwhelming firepower and air power advantage over pretty much anyone else, every other country, but it shows how just unprepared they actually are to do this because we're just used to bombing villages. We're not used to them shooting back at us. I found that quite funny.
Yeah.
So the US is also continuing, despite all the pressuring of Netanyahu and the Zionist lobby and the Israel lobby in the US, they're still continuing to pursue talks with Iran on Iran's nuclear deal.
Yep.
So Mike Waltz, who was on the Trump team, he got, I believe, fired, and I think he's now, off the top of my head,
UN representative.
But it's suspected that the reason he was given that position is because he could no longer be trusted to be part of Trump's team as he was trying to undermine the Iran negotiations from within.
Yeah.
So the funny thing is the Iran negotiations now are looking more and more like the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action.
The JCPOA.
Like the 10-year-old JCPOA, which was kind of scuttled by the Israelis because they didn't want Iran and the US to come to any deal about anything ever.
Yeah.
And so it's more likely resembling that, which was meant to be a crowning achievement of Obama's Middle East policy.
Right. Yep.
So I find that absolutely hilarious. Trump is also, it's kind of funny, just the media, he's also kind of flexed a bit on Bibi because he's announced that he's not going to Israel. He's going on an upcoming diplomatic trip to the Middle East to meet all the leaders of the region.
Trump is.
Hasn't announced he's visiting Netanyahu, which is
poor Bibi.
Poor Bibi, I know, he's losing his allies, man. But I do find that quite amusing. Now, I think that it's starting to appear that Trump's agenda isn't lining up with the aims of Netanyahu's government because I think obviously he really, I'll elaborate afterwards, but I think he really does want to have that kind of, and I doubt that he's going to do it. I've always said from the get-go, I don't think he'll really stop the war train in any significant. He hasn't done it in Ukraine. He hasn't really done it in the Middle East. But I don't think he wants to be seen as the person that's perpetuating this. So I think he kind of wants a decisive, he wants it to wrap up quickly.
Yeah. And he wants Netanyahu to know that he's in control.
Yeah.
We're the empire, you're not.
You're not.
We tell you what
to do. We tell you what to do. Exactly. However, that does not, Bibi's whole strategy, that does not align with Netanyahu's strategy, because the whole purpose of this thing is to stretch it out as long as possible, is to be as violent and destructive, is to cause as much damage to the region, because the more chaos there is, the longer Netanyahu can stay in power, the longer he can use the excuse of national security to not have to be investigated in Israel for his, his corruption and his ongoing, his embezzlement, his ongoing investigations that are being undertaken against him. So those two things do not marry up. However, I think to assume that they're to assume that they're even though the bromance may be over on paper, if you think that they're not going to be tightly coordinating with every aspect of security in the region, you are wrong. Yeah. But I think this shows that there is an awareness amongst the domestic population in the United States that people are sick of what has been happening, and people are sick of Benjamin Netanyahu. So there was a recent op-ed in the New York Times penned by Thomas Friedman, and it's essentially called it's written as an open letter to Trump, and he writes, "This Israeli government is not a friend of the US, not the Israeli government, just specifically this one, specifically this particular iteration, which has spewed out this ultra-right Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich. This is not helpful to US interests in the region. I'd argue that no Israeli government has ever been particularly helpful to US interests in the region. And obviously US alignment with Israel and support of Israel has always been there because you've had the very strong Zionist influence. But in the 70s with Kissinger, for example, it was all about making sure to counter the Russians' influence in the region. And he even in this article, he even criticizes their policy in Gaza. He's like, we have to stop. We have to get the hostages home. They've killed all these people in Gaza. So we need to kind of put a bit of pressure on them to stop. I think there's a growing faction in Israel that's anti-Netanyahu. I don't think he's very domestically popular. No.
There's massive protests going on at the moment.
Consistently.
Just last week, huge protests.
Consistently.
All through Tel Aviv.
And the funny thing is that they kind of want the more, not the insane messianic Zionists.
The more moderate liberal
They want the more
ones.
moderate liberal Zionists who, again, as someone on the left, I struggle to wrap my head around the concept, around the concept of the more liberal-orientated kind of settler colonial society. But I think there's a lot of pressure in Israel, and a lot of people have realised, look, you can't keep this going on forever. What holds the nation state of Israel together is starting to come apart, and Bibi's the one putting his foot down and pushing it forwards at even greater speeds while it's rattling itself further and further apart. So I think there's this definite kind of there's this definite pushback and resistance. And I think the problem the Israelis have is that as much as many people, much of the kind of Zionist diaspora in Europe and in the United States, in Australia, don't like Bibi, it's that, and they want the idea of having as someone that isn't Netanyahu a more liberal-minded person, there's no one else in Israel. No. He has hollowed out the political system through his dominance on power. There's no one else that could possibly replace him and keep the state intact in its current formation. So I think he is he's an arsehole. I've always said this, but he's a very smart operator. He's a very cunning operator. Man. But that being said, what the outcome will be of this at the end of the day, what the world, the Palestinians, the Israelis, the Syrians, the Lebanese, the Egyptians, everyone in this region will have to have dealt with as a result of Bibi Netanyahu continuing his own agenda. It's going to be yet to be seen. The good thing is, I think there is obviously a kind of, shall we say, a cooling down of the kind of tensions between the US and Iran, which were going up
Yep.
quite a bit, also between the US and Yemen. So Trump has pretty much said, he's like, yeah, we're stepping away from Yemen. I guess that's the tacit admission that our policy didn't work.
Yep.
But they also said, look, if they attack, they're not being friendly, they're not buddies, but they're saying, look, if they kill Americans, then we're going to have to do something about it.
Yep.
But again, we're stepping away, at least on paper. At least on paper. And I think that might also be the kind of Trumpian tactics to kind of put a bit of leverage out to kind of be able to push the Israelis a little bit more.
Okay.
But that being said, I do not. Do I think any kind of actual concrete policy will change in the region? No.
Okay.
Yeah. And while the whole thing's happening, we have the biggest, in my opinion, humanitarian disaster of the last 20 years in its most concentrated, evil, horrific form with the suffering is just incalculable.
Yeah, it's horrible.
And that's still going to keep going on. So I don't. At the end of the day, the end results of the policy, I don't think are going to change.
No.
We'll keep updating everyone on what happens.
Yeah.
Any funny new developments? Nothing funny about that, but we try to find the light side of things. But any new developments in the region, we will report on to you guys. As always, thank you very much, Jordie.
Thanks, James. We will wrap it up there. Like and subscribe. Thanks.
Ciao,
Bye.
ciao.